Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, welcoming you to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Lavochkin La-7, a Russian fighter aircraft coming at a tier of 4 and a battle rating of 4.0. To provide you with a brief historical overview of the La-7 in general and the variant depicted here today, we must go back to 1943. At which point the La-5 was one of the main and highly enjoyed fighter aircraft of the Soviet Air Force. Still, there was room for improvement, with the Russian Central Aerohydrodynamics Institute, the TSAGI, finding there was room for aerodynamic improvements to be made to the La-5. Wind tunnel tests conducted by this same bureau between the summer and autumn of 1943 were to confirm this, leading to the proposal being put forward for the La-5 to be refined under the prototype designation of La-120, as of the autumn of 1943. The recommendations were taken up by Lavochkin, the design bureau behind the La-5, with the bureau initiating construction of the improved La-5 as of January 1944. The major changes included a smoothing of the engine cowling, the oil radiator being moved to the fuselage's last centre, a modified wing of the same wingspan as the La-5FN, but with metal, not wooden wing spars to be introduced. The engine air intake was to be moved from the bottom of the engine cowling to the wing roots. A new Vish 105 V4 Series 3-blade propeller was to be fitted, and this propeller was to be driven by a single ShVaK ASH 82FN air-cooled radial engine, providing 1,850 horsepower. Interestingly enough, this engine was essentially an enhanced variant of the ShVaK M82FN engine, another radial type as taken from the La-5FN. The armament was to also be uprated, with 3 B-20 Berezin 20mm cannons mounted above the engine. The test flights of the prototype La-7 in February-March 1944 were blighted by 2 major engine failures, yet the plane was to live up to expectations, being lighter, more maneuverable than, and roughly 30 km an hour faster on average than the La-5FN predecessor. Following on from this, the La-7 was to be put into production by May of 1944. With the initial La-7s, unlike the one depicted on screen right now, being rolled out into combat service by the end of summer 1944. The initial La-7s were armed with the same 2x20mm ShVaK Cannon armament with 200 rounds per gun as the La-5FN. These two 20mm cannons were mounted above the engine, and the reason for the lack of the B-20s at this point was due to the insufficient availability of the B-20 cannon. Still, the initial combat service of the La-7 was to prove highly effective, despite the number of engine failures being encountered, and these were partially attributed to the wing root air intakes for the engine inhaling a significant amount of sand and dust. The B-20 armed variants of the La-7, also known as the La-7 B-20, were to enter production as of January 1945, with these planes being roughly 65 kg heavier than the base La-7 variant due to the change in armament. On the whole, the La-7 was to see combat service as the equal to, if not slightly superior on the whole to, the Messerschmitt 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190 right through to the end of the Second World War, with the La-7 remaining in production until the close of 1946, when a final total of 5,753 La-7s being produced across all variants. As a result, with our historical overview out of the way, let us take a look at how the La-7 acquits itself in War Thunder. For today's gameplay, we are on the ground strike map Grave Robbers Cliffs. For this, and all subsequent games, we are to use the following setup. Omni-purpose belts for our 20mm cannons. The reasoning here is twofold. Firstly, the mixture of armour-piercing incendiary, fragmentation incendiary and high-explosive fragmentation rounds works well in ensuring, with accurate fire, that your opponent, whether they be bomber or fighter alike, will always break into multiple pieces upon instance or catch alight and burn to death accordingly. Our secondary reason is due to the tracer component attributed to the armour-piercing incendiary and fragmentation incendiary rounds. If we combine this with the low muzzle velocity of the ShVaK Cannon, we can see that at distances of 500 metres or more, it may be difficult to lead a target accordingly and score a direct hit in the first instance. The tracer will allow us to rectify this rather rapidly. For our gun convergence we are using a standardised 500 metres as our armament is based in the nose, and we must interrupt our setup here to discuss the greyed out WEP. As we kickstart another WEP stage at 3600 metres, we can see that our WEP is now greyed out, but we are still reconsolidating our speed to a very gradual extent. I would like to postulate that the WEP is still working, but at 50% of its standard capacity by comparison with what I would call the red WEP stage. This change to a grey WEP seems to occur at approximately 3400 to 3800 metres altitude, depending on the speed you are going at and the inclination of your aircraft. But in the meantime we split S and come around on the Spitfire F Mark 9, with our secondary burst knocking out their tail controls and allowing us to fly off back up into a gradual zoom climb whilst they plummet into the ground for our first kill. We conclude our setup very quickly by noting that we have the standard 30-minute fuel load to ensure that we can make it to the end of the game unscathed in terms of fuel capacity. And with our first kill in the bag, we must realise that the La-7 embodies the energy fighter potential taken over from the La-5FN that we saw quite a while ago, and the review of the La-5FN may be seen using the link in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now. The La-7 embodies the manoeuvres, the split S and the Immelman very well, as we can see, and we will continue to see throughout this video. The high roll rate and the decent elevator response, so long as you are not going at speeds in excess of 675 km an hour, will mean you will always be able to perform vertical manoeuvres with relative ease, and this enables you to line up your boom and zoom passes at a comfortable rate, and you always will be in full control of the aircraft until you hit that 675 km an hour speed barrier. In the meantime we are flying off towards the other edge of the map because of the KI-84 in the enemy team. As a battle rating contemporary at 4.7, the KI-84 has similar performance characteristics to our own in terms of its overall acceleration and climb rate, if not a slightly higher climb rate at lower altitudes. However, we do not have the agility or the manoeuvrability of the KI-84, meaning that we need to either go for the head-on or attack them from a position of altitude or energy advantage. This is what we are trying to achieve by using our friendly Wellingtons as bait to draw the KI-84 away. The Wellingtons have been dispatched by our foe, and we look up towards the B-25 to ensure that they are not trying to use their platform as a fighter. Once this has been ascertained, we will continue to proceed with our attempt to head on the KI-84, but they decide to go after our friendly KI-43 in the midst of a dive instead. To change up, we decide to go into a very sharp climb to ensure that the KI-61 Heian cannot climb after us, forcing them to stall out and coming around in a standardised hammerhead at this point, or very shortly. We can see that the overall rudder control on the La-7 is potent. It is a little bit slow and can snap back and forth as if it is made of elastic at points, especially with decreasing speed. At 250 km an hour or less, very sharp pulls on the rudder may lead to the plane snapping about violently, although this will be rectified with a little bit of mouse aim control, alternatively if you decide to bring the ailerons in. We dispatch the KI-61 accordingly and push on towards the KI-84 who decides to go after our friendly B5N2, and here we demonstrate the inability to get an accurate shot on target due to the low muzzle velocity of the 20mm cannons that we field. Our intention is to try and force the KI-84 not to be able to hit our friendly B5N2, but as they break around into a sharp turn here, we cannot follow them, and we embody the risk of the KI-84 going into a turn fight with us, which they will eventually win. We have to sacrifice our friendly B5N2 in order to perform another Immelman and ensure that we will continue to have the energy advantage we need to defeat our foe. In doing so, we pick up on the fact an enemy La-5F is coming towards us. With the La-5 having a lower overall position and altitude advantage by comparison with our own, we decide to go into a head-on, with the La-5F snap rolling very well out of our incoming fire and then coming around. It's at this point that we use our speed advantage and the altitude advantage we had initially in order to break over the top of them, again highlighting our great overall climb rate and ensuring that the La-5 will have to stall out. We begin to bleed off the majority of our speed, our WEP begins to run out, but at this point we can use the combination of very gradual rudder input and aileron control to make sure the La-5 stalls out and we can swoop down on them. As we see here, they begin to enter a gradual spin and we pick up our third kill. By comparison with the predecessor variants of the Lavochkin aircraft, the La-7 is slightly more manoeuvrable than the La-5FN if we use that as our base reference. The two planes are very similar and the battle ratings of 4.0 do match up, But what is interesting, by putting the La-7 to a tier of 4, you do replicate the fact that the La-7 is slightly faster on the level, with a high top speed, it accelerates slightly better, and its climb rate is just a little bit more prominent than that of the La-5FN. In a turn fight, the La-7 just has a slight advantage, but not by a margin which is going to be incredibly noticeable unless the turn fight goes on for a very significant period of time. In general, the La-7 is the more manoeuvrable aircraft due to the lighter airframe, and this will work to your advantage, especially when you have an La-5 on your tail, and you can enter manoeuvres such as a horizontal scissors, which will gradually allow you to force the La-5 to overshoot, as they do not have the lightness on the controls that the La-7 does. We climb up underneath a B-25J1 Mitchell to knock out their tail controls, meaning they will gradually plummet into the ground for our 4th kill. But returning to the point of the comparison with what the La-7 brings to the table by comparison with its predecessor, this is a lightened airframe by comparison with the La-5FN, and it is a very good idea to see the La-7 as literally the La-5FN on a diet, whereby you have the same armament, the same overall characteristics of a higher roll rate which begins to disintegrate in excess of speeds of 675 km an hour, with that cap being at 650 km an hour for the La-5FN, and the controls in general do begin to lock up, especially in the form of the elevator at a speed of 725 km an hour, and this is something to be careful of, especially when you try to pull up close to the ground. On a number of occasions I have thrown this plane into the ground because I have not realised that the elevator seizes up to an extent at 725 km an hour, and I've tried to boom and zoom a target taken off from an airfield in an airfield domination game. The roll rate is consistent despite a lock-up occurring at 700 km an hour. It will bleed out to the extent that it's probably 75% of the standard high roll rate that you would expect, although this lock-up is similar to that on the Focke-Wulf 190 A's and D's, whereby it is noticeable but it is not too much to compromise your overall game plan, which means at extreme speeds in excess of 800 km an hour, the La-7 can still enact its boom and zoom capabilities, albeit with a little bit less overall strength. In the meantime, as we consolidate our altitude now to a position of 6,200 metres above ground level, we look around and see no other enemy fighters even encroaching within say 3 kilometres of us. We have obtained the higher altitude positions for a little bit of tactical cunning and at the same time taking our opponents at face value, and we note the La-5 pursuing after our friendly B-17. In the meantime, we're just going to have to fly level because we need to look for an opportunity in order to use our boom and zoom capabilities once again. And it is during this time that we need to discuss, as our overall frame rate locks up very gradually, and I apologise for that, we need to discuss, or highlight here, the boom and zoom at high speed. We can see despite the La-5 trying to cut underneath us rather sharply, we have the controllability at 913 km an hour to hit them and set them on fire. And this echoes what we were just talking about, that the control surfaces do lock up, but not to the extent whereby they are impossible to use, especially by comparison with say a Spitfire Mark 5B, which at 700 km an hour sacrifices 90% of its roll rate. We come around on a KI-102, but due to their tight turn circle and their ability to use their potent rudder effectively, we cannot get the initial shot, and we do not want to go into a head-on with their rather large 57mm cannon, if I remember correctly. We come around the back of the KI-102, having expended all of their energy, and pick up our 6th kill. With an ace in a day +1 now in the bag, we come around once again, as we are behind the enemy spawn, and we do not want to spawn kill. We look towards the left-hand side of the map, as seen from the enemy's perspective, and we note a large concentration of enemy aircraft building up. But here lies a small problem with the La-7, and that is its ability to build up speed in a dive. This plane is very similar to the Yak-9U which we previously reviewed, whereby when it goes into a dive, it does not pick up its speed as quickly as you may expect, especially not to the level of that of say a Focke-Wulf 190 D9. The build-up rate is similar to that of say the Spitfire F Mark 14E, which means that especially in those longer distance boom and zoom runs through an entire section of the enemy team, you may actually lose your speed or have opponents who can catch up to you. And speaking of catching up to some, we just took out that Spitfire F Mark 9 who was close to the ground, thanks to the fact they did not have much energy and we could catch up with them appropriately. We can try to conserve our energy enough to bring this rear attacker P-47D, although they are knocked out by a friendly I-185, and we now have to consider another enemy Spitfire, an I-185 and a Messerschmitt 109 all trying to come after us, especially with the Messerschmitt 109G diving down on us at a gradual pace. The Messerschmitt 109 will be able to catch up to us, but because we retain enough energy we can break over this hill and begin to consider initiating a turn fight up against the plane which we are much more manoeuvrable than, the Messerschmitt 109 G2 or G6. We use the rock here in order to provide a small amount of shielding, and we cut accordingly, levelling out and pushing hard on the left rudder to make sure that the Messerschmitt 109 G2 chop cuts over the top of us. And with our potent performance in our engine at lower altitudes, as we can see at 1,800 metres, we can take off the right hand wing of the G2 as they try to go into a spiral climb, and we knock them out accordingly, with their death being only inches away in time. So at this point, as we continue to look behind, we are going to realise that an enemy I-185 M82 is now on our tail, although we are not going to see it at first. In the meantime, we are engrossed in seeing the Messerschmitt 109 going down for our 8th kill, but we continue to look around, and we finally notice the I-185. At this point, we should be aware that the I-185 is the much tighter and more manoeuvrable aircraft, due to the fact its control surfaces are much lighter to handle. But with the amount of energy the I-185 brought to the frame, we are able to turn inside them and try to force ahead on. We do not get it there, but we come around for a second one, with the I-185 braking round hard on their rudder and their ailerons. But at this point, we both decide to snap roll simultaneously, as we are both afraid of our nose-mounted 20mm cannon armament. It's in this instance, as we begin to come around the back of the I-185, they are being harassed by our friendly Messerschmitt 109. But with a little bit of accuracy, we can rip apart their tail control, or as seen here with their central gear leg, and pick up kill number 9. We see there how, despite the fact that the I-185 is the more manoeuvrable aircraft, because they came with so much energy by comparison with our own speed and energy with lower altitude, we're able to cut inside with them and manoeuvre with them. And that is one key element to consider in the La-7 where you are attacked by a plane such as the Spitfire LF Mark 9 or a Spitfire F Mark 16, and they decide to dive on you. If you decide to dive down to lower altitudes as well and take the fight to very low altitude, i.e. 1,000 metres or less, the great performance of your engine at low altitude means you can always build up your energy after performing manoeuvres, and you can force a number of opponents to overshoot thanks to your higher roll rate, cut round due to your powerful yet rather unstable rudder, and try to get a shot on them, as we saw with the Messerschmitt 109 G2 and again we saw with the I-185. I've had a number of instances where I've been able to take down planes such as the Spitfire F Mark 9 because they have tried to dive on me. I've built the speed of the engagement up because I've gone into a dive as well, and eventually as they've overshot, I've been able to snap round before they can turn to face me again and put a couple of 20mm cannon rounds into the cockpit or their wings. In the meantime, as we rebuild our altitude, we can see here how our overall climb rate is decent enough to enable us to build up our altitude rather rapidly. The climb rate can be broken down into two stages. The pre-climb, i.e. the climb rate up to approximately 3,000 metres altitude, and the climb rate beyond that. Up to 3,000 metres altitude, the climb rate is very good. It is not in the league of say the P63 A10 King Cobra, which is probably one of the best climbers of the battle rating of 4.0, but the La-7 is up there. In excess of 3,000 metres, the climb rate begins to peter out, in combination with the engine's performance beginning to become less and less prominent, meaning that your climb rate is still good, and you can get to altitudes in excess of 6,000 metres quite rapidly, meaning that you can take the fight to higher altitude aircraft, although do not expect this to be at the same pace as say that of a Spitfire F Mark 14E, which continues to hold its climb rate all the way up to altitude extremes. Of course, here we are talking about a battle rating 5.0 aircraft, but you may face those from time to time. One notable opponent and one of your main threats will be the F8F-1 Bearcat if you do happen to see a battle rating 5.0 game, and you will have to use the concept of trying to force a high speed dive overshoot in order to gain the upper hand, with the Bearcat having similar manoeuvrability but a tighter turn circle. In the meantime, we see a friendly PE2 being pursued by a KF-45 and a Yak-3. We ask the PE2 to try and come over to us so that we may assist them, but they do not have the time in order to do so as they are knocked out by our opponents. Unfortunately, this means we'll have to deal with the Yak-3 and the KI-45 in revenge, with the Yak-3 only 2 kilometres below us and the KI-45 now coming nose up to attack us. We've got ourselves a nice pair to attack here, or at least we can knock out one of them. We're going to use our standard procedure of either trying to force our opponent to bleed out their energy as they climb up towards us, as in the case of the very light, but still not as manoeuvrable with low speed KI-45, whereby they are now in the proceeding of entering a stall, and we can knock them out for kill number 10 and our double ace. We break up at this point, have regained all the energy that we've lost in terms of our potential energy, and we snap round, with the Yak-3 nowhere in sight. We level out, realising that most of the enemy team have either been knocked out of the game, or they are no longer flying planes into the sky, and we see a G5N just spawned in. We proceed parallel to their line of travel, making sure not to head directly towards them to give them the time to dive if they deem it appropriate, otherwise we will have to engage. And one final point we should note here is the armament. The two 20mm cannons are absolutely devastating, as expected from the La-5FN, so long as you hit your target. But what is more important is the fact that you have 340 rounds, which sounds like a lot, but due to the high fire rate of the 20mm cannons, you may find yourself in between reloads just when you've got a target in your sights. This is something to be aware of as we pick up our 11th and final kill of today, and it may be worth investing some points in reload skill. We snap roll here and show the very prominent roll rate and the ability to perform very tight and quick snap rolls in the La-7 in order to evade the 20mm rear facing cannon of the G5N, which can knock down your fighter quite quickly. In terms of the durability of this aircraft, you have to realise that there are two upgrades for the durability. One enables you to change the armoured glass, which sits behind the pilot, and convert that into, I believe it's 75mm, and the other upgrade is to change the armour plate behind the pilot to one that is 10mm in thickness. These two upgrades are listed as changing the overall flight characteristics by making the plane heavier and reducing its climb rate. In all honesty, from my experience, I've noticed having the plate and the armoured glass addition does not change the overall handling characteristics or the climb rate of this plane. It remains exactly the same, or to such an extent it has been changed that I have not picked it up, i.e. it is minute. So it is worth rolling with these additional durability upgrades. The plane's durability on the whole, however, is decent, despite the fact if you do receive a number of 20mm armour piercing incendiary or high explosive incendiary rounds to the rear of the fuselage, you will find that this plane will burst into flames quite quickly and burn to death. But the overall durability of the main fuselage and the wings is quite good. With that being said, it is time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. With our 11 kills providing 40,761 silver lines and an additional 2,352 research points, all going towards our continued work on the I-185M71. We must now come on to our final point of how one can defeat the La-7 in a given matchup. If you are flying a more maneuverable fighter, such as a Supermarine Spitfire, an F-8F-1 Bearcat, a KI-84 or an A6M, the trick is to feint a head-on pass, snap rolling out of the way of the incoming fire, and then using your high manoeuvrability and tighter turn circle to come around and re-engage first. Alternatively, if the La-7 pilot does decide to dive towards the deck, pursue, but moderate your distance and your speed, as the La-7 pilot may try to use their higher roll rate to force you to overshoot. And this is the same tactic that I would recommend if you are flying an energy fighter such as the Focke-Wulf 90 D9, or a plane that is significantly less manoeuvrable by comparison with the La-7, such as the Focke-Wulf 90 A8 or the Messerschmitt 109 G6. By attacking the La-7 from a position of altitude or energy advantage and forcing it to level out at lower altitudes, the La-7 pilot will have only two options left available: either lift the nose up to try and climb, or brake hard and turn left on right, at which point you have a clear shot onto target. We conclude then by realising that the La-7 is another successful Russian energy fighter, carrying on from where the La-5FN left off, as we can see here where we came second by comparison to the rest of our team. The recommended speed range for this aircraft I would say is about 300 km an hour to 600 km an hour, and for altitude it is 3,000 metres to 5,000 metres, as demonstrated throughout the gameplay. Although never be afraid to take this plane below 2,000 metres altitude, as that is where your engine works best and your acceleration will be at its highest. Indeed, for those who enjoyed the La-5FN, the La-7 will be a refresher, because it is simply put a Lavochkin that went on a diet. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Yet until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.